My mother set her mug down on the table and fixed her eyes on me. You and Samuel have been here 3 days, and I've yet to see either of you reach for a single bill beyond your own meals. The cabin, the ferry runs, the groceries for everyone, it can't keep falling on your father and me. After everything we've quietly covered for you over the years, the car repair when you were between jobs, the apartment deposit so you could finally move out on your own, I thought you understood that family means stepping up without being asked twice. Samuel looks content letting you handle these conversations. I hope he's not the kind of man who lets the woman beside him carry the weight while he enjoys the view. This isn't about keeping score. But when one person keeps stepping back, someone else has to keep stepping forward, and right now that someone is still your father and me. If you can't see why it's reasonable for you to cover the difference this week without turning it into something dramatic, then maybe the rest of us need to reconsider what this family getaway is actually for. Hi, my name is Mia Foster, I am 27 years old. Those words landed in the middle of our first evening at the waterfront cabin in the San Juan Islands. My father stared at his plate. My Aunt Nancy gave a small, approving nod. My cousin Hannah shifted in her chair and wouldn't meet my eyes. Her boyfriend Kyle, who had come along for the trip, suddenly found the water outside the window very interesting. Samuel, my fiancé, sat beside me, his hand resting on my knee under the table, but he stayed silent. I felt the old, familiar tightening in my chest, the one that always came when my mother framed money as love and love as obligation. We were only 3 days into the 2-week trip. The ferry back to the mainland ran just twice a day. There was no quick exit. The next morning my mother asked me, in front of everyone, if I could put the boat rental on my card just for now, since you're the one with the steady paycheck. She said it lightly, like it was the most natural request in the world. Samuel offered to split it. She smiled and said, "That's sweet, but Mia knows how these things work in this family." Hannah looked down at her coffee. My father said nothing. I put the rental on my card because arguing in front of everyone felt worse than the charge itself. By the 4th day the comments had become smaller, sharper, constant. My mother mentioned to my aunt, loud enough for me to hear while we washed dishes, that some people forget who carried them when things got tight. My aunt laughed once, short and knowing, then glanced at me and went quiet. Samuel tried to talk to me about it on the small back deck after dinner. I told him I was fine. I wasn't. I just didn't have the words yet for what was happening. On the 5th afternoon, Jason Rivera, a family friend who sometimes handled logistics for these trips, sent a message to the group chat. He meant to forward a ferry schedule. Instead, he forwarded the entire thread my mother and my aunt had been sending each other the night before. I was sitting on the porch steps when it came through. The first message was from my mother. Mia will cover the rest of the cabin and the activities like she always does. After that car repair and the apartment deposit we gave her last year, she knows better than to push back when family needs her. Samuel can watch. It'll be good for both of them. My aunt had replied within minutes, exactly. She can afford it with that job of hers. And with him around now she has even less excuse to hold anything back. Let her feel the pressure a little. It reminds her where her priorities belong. I read it twice. My hands started shaking so hard I had to set the phone on my lap. The water in front of the cabin was calm, sunlight glinting off it like nothing in the world had just changed. I forwarded the thread to Samuel without a message. He came outside 5 minutes later, sat down beside me, and didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was low. "This isn't new, is it?" I shook my head. The knot in my chest had turned into something heavier, something that made it hard to pull air all the way in. I found my mother in the kitchen later, alone for once. My hands were still. Unsteady, but I kept my voice even. I saw the messages Jason forwarded by mistake. She didn't flinch. She kept drying a plate, slow and deliberate. Private conversations between sisters aren't meant for everyone to read, Mia. You know that. You've been using things you did for me years ago to make me pay for everything now. That's not family. That's a ledger. She set the plate down and turned to face me. The look on her face was the same one she had used when I was 16 and asked why I had to keep covering my younger cousin's expenses at family events. Calm. Reasonable. Unmovable. Everything we've ever done for you came from love. If you're choosing to see it as some kind of debt, that says more about you than it does about us. My Aunt Nancy walked in then, drying her hands on a towel. She looked between us, then at my phone still open on the counter. Some things are better left between the people who actually understand the whole picture, she said. Her tone was light, almost kind. It landed like a door closing. I felt something inside me go very still. Hannah had come to the doorway behind them. She met my eyes for half a second, then looked away. My father was out on the deck with Uncle Paul, both of them suddenly very focused on the view. Even Kyle had found somewhere else to be. My mother picked the plate back up. If you keep turning this into a fight, don't expect everyone else to line up on your side. Some of us still remember what family is supposed to look like. She walked past me. My aunt followed. The cabin felt smaller than it had 5 minutes earlier. I went back out to the porch. Samuel was still there. He didn't ask what happened. He just reached for my hand. I let him take it, but I couldn't stop seeing the messages, couldn't stop hearing my aunt's quiet agreement and my mother's calm certainty that I would keep paying because I always had. For the first time since we arrived, I wondered what it would actually cost me to stop. If you've ever found out that someone who says they love you has been keeping a private list of what you owe them, you know how fast the ground can shift under your feet. I didn't know whether to keep pretending everything was fine or to say something that might break whatever was left holding us together. I still don't know which choice would have hurt less in the end. The porch boards creaked under my weight as I sat back down beside Samuel. The messages were still open on my phone between us. He didn't ask me what my mother had said in the kitchen. He just kept his hand over mine, his thumb moving in small, steady circles like he was trying to keep both of us from coming apart. The rest of that evening passed in careful silence. My Aunt Nancy kept the conversation moving whenever anyone got too quiet. Hannah and Kyle stayed close to each other on the couch. My father and Uncle Paul went outside to check the boat lines even though it wasn't necessary. I watched them all and felt something small and important shift inside me. They weren't choosing sides out loud. They were simply making sure they didn't end up on the wrong one. The next morning my mother acted as if nothing had happened. She asked me, in the same light tone she used for the weather, if I could cover the kayak rentals for the group that afternoon since you're already set up with the boat charge from yesterday. I told her no. The word came out quieter than I meant it to, but it was still the first time I had said it to her face in years. She paused with her coffee halfway to her mouth. Then she smiled the way she did when she wanted everyone to see how reasonable she was being. I see you're choosing to make this difficult for everyone instead of just handling what needs to be handled like an adult. That's fine, Mia. We'll manage. We always do. Samuel had been standing in the doorway. He didn't say anything then, but later, when we were alone on the path that led down to the water, he asked me how long this had really been going on. I told him about the car repair 2 years ago that had actually been paid for with money I'd given her to hold for me. I told him about the apartment deposit that had come with a quiet understanding that I would cover family expenses whenever she asked after that. He listened without interrupting. When I finished he said, very quietly, that he didn't know if he could keep watching me disappear into the version of myself she expected. That sentence sat between us for the rest of the walk back. By the 6th day the pulling away had become obvious. Hannah stopped asking me to walk with her in the mornings. When I tried to talk to her alone near the dock, she glanced toward the cabin first, then told me she didn't want to get in the middle of anything. Kyle stayed beside her but wouldn't meet my eyes either. Uncle Paul, who had always been the one to crack jokes at dinner, now ate in near silence and left the room whenever my mother started one of her careful, reasonable speeches. My father spent more time on the boat or on calls that didn't seem to require him. Only Jason Rivera kept trying to smooth things over. He apologized 3 separate times for forwarding the thread. Each time I told him it wasn't his fault. Each time he looked like he wanted to say something else and then didn't. The second message thread arrived on the 7th morning. This one wasn't a mistake. My mother sent it directly to the family group chat, the one that included everyone staying at the cabin. It was a list of remaining expenses for the 2nd week, with my name next to the largest amounts and a note at the bottom that read, "Mia has always been the one we can count on to make sure everyone is taken care of." I'm grateful she remembers what family actually requires. I read it standing at the kitchen counter while the others were still waking up. Samuel came in behind me and read it over my shoulder. His hand found the small of my back, steady and warm, but I could feel the tension in it. "She's doing this on purpose," he said. "She wants everyone to see you say no so they'll think you're the problem." I knew he was right. That didn't make it easier to breathe. I waited until after breakfast, when most people had scattered to their rooms or the porch. I found my mother on the back deck, folding towels. My Aunt Nancy was with her, sorting through a bag of sunscreen and hats. I held up my phone so they could both see the message. "You sent this to the whole group." My mother didn't look up from the towels. "I sent it to the people who are here sharing this trip. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe we should talk about why." My aunt set down the bag of sunscreen. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "Some people need to learn that loyalty isn't optional just because you found someone new to stand behind. Your mother has carried more than her share for this family for a long time. You used to understand that." The words landed exactly where she meant them to. I felt the old reflex rise up, the one that wanted to apologize, to smooth it over, to make the tension disappear so everyone could go back to pretending. I let it rise and then I let it pass. "I'm not covering the rest of the week," I said. "Not the kayaks, not the extra groceries, not anything else that isn't already on my card. If that changes how you see me, then it changes how you see me." My mother finally looked at me. The calm expression was still in place, but something colder had moved into her eyes. "Then I suppose we'll see who shows up for the rest of this trip and who decides their new priorities matter more than the people who raised them." She picked up the stack of towels and walked back inside. My aunt followed without another word. I stood on the deck until my hands stopped shaking. That afternoon Samuel and I took the small boat out alone. The water was flat and gray under an overcast sky. He didn't push me to talk. I told him anyway, about the way my mother had always framed every request as a test of love, about how I had learned to pay quietly so I wouldn't have to watch her disappointment turn into something sharper. He listened until I ran out of words. Then he said the thing I had been afraid he would say. "I love you, Mia. But I don't know if I can build a life inside a family that treats you like a resource they're entitled to use." The sentence hung between us over the water. I didn't have an answer for him. Not yet. When we got back to the cabin, my mother was waiting on the porch with my father and Uncle Paul. She didn't raise her voice. She never did. She simply told me, in that same reasonable tone, that if I was going to keep creating division, perhaps it would be better if Samuel and I found other arrangements for the second half of the week. The ferry schedule was posted on the fridge. She had already circled the next available times. My father didn't look at me. Uncle Paul studied the boards under his feet. Hannah and Kyle had disappeared somewhere inside the cabin. Only my Aunt Nancy stood beside my mother, her expression unreadable. I felt the choice settle over me like cold water. I could keep fighting in a place where the rules had already been written without me. Or I could do the one thing my mother had never expected me to do. I turned to Samuel. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "We're leaving in the morning." My mother's mouth tightened, just slightly. My aunt looked at her and then back at me. For the first time since the messages had arrived, she didn't have anything to say. Samuel nodded once. He didn't ask if I was sure. He just went inside to start packing. I stayed on the porch a moment longer. The water in front of the cabin was still calm. Somewhere behind me I could hear my mother speaking to my father in a low voice. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. I already knew what they would be. I had finally said no out loud. And the family I had spent my whole life trying not to disappoint was already deciding what that no would cost me. The night passed in fragments. I packed our bags while Samuel sat on the edge of the bed, quiet but present. Every time I heard footsteps in the hall I braced for another conversation, but no one came to the door. My mother's last words on the porch kept looping in my head. I kept waiting for the old reflex to kick in, the one that would make me go downstairs and smooth everything over so the family could keep pretending. It never came. In the morning the cabin felt different. People moved around us without really seeing us. Hannah and Kyle left early for a walk and didn't come back before we carried our bags to the car. Uncle Paul helped load the trunk but wouldn't meet my eyes. My father stayed inside. Only my mother and my Aunt Nancy stood on the porch when Samuel and I were ready to drive to the ferry. My mother's voice was calm, the same tone she had used for every request since we arrived. You're choosing to end this trip early because you're uncomfortable with what family actually requires. I hope you understand that some choices have consequences that last longer than a ferry ride. My Aunt Nancy stood beside her, arms crossed loosely. She didn't add anything at first. Then she said, almost as an afterthought, loyalty has always been what held this family together. It's a shame to watch someone decide it only matters when it's convenient. I looked at her for a long moment. The words from the forwarded thread were still in my phone. I could have quoted them back to her right there on the porch. Instead I nodded once and got in the car. Samuel drove. Neither of us spoke until we were on the ferry, watching the island get smaller behind us. The water was choppy that morning. I kept my hands in my lap so he wouldn't see them shaking. Back on the mainland the drive home felt longer than it should have. Samuel asked once if I wanted to stop somewhere for coffee. I said no. When we finally pulled into our driveway he turned off the engine but didn't get out right away. I meant what I said on the boat, he told me. I don't know how to be in a family that treats you like that. But I also don't know how to watch you keep paying for something you never actually owed. I didn't have an answer that would make it easier for either of us. I just reached over and took his hand. The weeks after we got home were quiet in a way that felt both empty and necessary. My mother didn't call. My Aunt Nancy sent one text that said only, "I hope you're thinking clearly now." I didn't reply. Hannah texted me twice, once to ask if we made it back safely, once to say she was sorry things had gotten so tense. I answered both messages but didn't push for more. She didn't either. Jason Rivera called once to apologize again for the forwarded thread. I told him it wasn't his fault and that I was grateful he had sent it, even by accident. He sounded like he wanted to say something else. In the end he just wished me well. The twist came on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after we left the islands. I was at work when Hannah called. She sounded like she had been crying. She told me she had finally asked my mother about the messages. My mother had told her that I had always been difficult about money and that Samuel was turning me against the family. Then Hannah said something that made the whole pattern click into place for both of us. She said the same thing to me last year when I tried to set a boundary about covering Kyle's share of a family trip, Hannah told me. She told me loyalty wasn't optional and that I was being selfish. I believed her. I think I still believed her until I heard her say it about you. I sat at my desk with the phone pressed to my ear and felt something heavy settle. My Aunt Nancy's words on the porch, "Loyalty has always been what held this family together," had been the same words she used to keep Hannah in line. The same words my mother had used on me for years. They weren't about love. They were about keeping the accounting system running. I didn't tell Hannah what to do. I just told her I loved her and that I was done letting anyone use that word as a weapon. She cried harder then. She said she didn't know if she could do what I had done. I told her I didn't know either, most days. We left it there. Samuel and I had our own hard conversation that night. He asked if I was going to keep the door open for my mother the way I always had before. I told him no. Not the way it had been. I was going to send one final message to the group chat with the screenshots of both threads and a single sentence. This is what the loyalty you kept talking about actually looked like. I'm done participating in it. I sent it the next morning. My mother didn't reply. My Aunt Nancy didn't reply. My father sent a short text that said only, "I'm sorry it came to this." Hannah didn't say anything in the chat, but she texted me privately later that she had seen it and that she was still figuring out what came next for her. Uncle Paul never responded at all. Kyle sent me a message that just said you did the right thing and nothing else. The silence that followed was the consequence I had been afraid of. No more invitations. No more group texts about holidays or birthdays. No more pretending that the help my mother had given me years ago had been free. The illusion that family support was unconditional was gone, and what was left felt smaller and colder than I had expected. Samuel stayed. We fought more in those first months than we ever had before, about money, about boundaries, about how much of my past I was still carrying. Some days I wondered if the cost of saying no on that porch had been too high. Other days I knew it hadn't been high enough. 6 months after the islands, I ran into Jason Rivera at a coffee shop near my office. He asked how I was. I told him I was still learning how to be a person whose family didn't get to decide what she owed them. He nodded like he understood. Then he said something I didn't expect. "Your aunt called me a few weeks after you left. She wanted to know if I still had the original thread. She said she needed to make sure no one else saw it. I told her I had already deleted it. She didn't sound happy. I thought about that later, driving home. My Aunt Nancy's own words, the ones she had used to pressure me and to keep Hannah quiet, had become something she needed to hide. The betrayer's own language had turned back on her, even if it didn't bring any big public reckoning. It was enough to know she was afraid of it. I still don't talk to my mother. I sent one last message after the group chat post, a short one that said I would not be available for any conversations that treated past help as ongoing debt. She never answered. My Aunt Nancy has stayed silent too. Hannah texts sometimes, short, careful messages that don't ask for anything. I answer when I can. I don't push. Samuel and I are still figuring out what our life looks like without the old version of my family in it. Some days it feels like freedom. Some days it just feels like loss. Both things can be true at the same time. I used to believe that if I just kept being the person they needed, the one who covered the difference without complaint, then the love would stay unconditional. I was wrong. The love was never unconditional. It was a transaction I had been taught to call family. Letting go didn't fix anything. It didn't make my mother change or bring my aunt to any kind of apology. It didn't make the rest of the family choose me. It only made the cost of staying higher than the cost of leaving. That is the part one keep coming back to when people ask me if I regret getting on that ferry. I don't. But I also don't pretend it didn't hurt like hell to watch the people I had spent my whole life trying to please decide that my boundaries were the problem. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the version of family you were raised to protect and protecting the person you're trying to become, you know how lonely that choice can feel even when you know it's the right one. I still wonder some nights what would have happened if I had stayed quiet one more time. Would the ledger have ever been considered paid in full? I don't think it would have. But I don't have to wonder anymore.